Good morning, guys, and welcome to another pre-algebra video. We are going to continue in Unit 1, all about integers, and our objective for today is that by the end of the day, you will be able to add integers. Now, a lot of times what you will hear me say instead of the word add is the word combine. And so I'm going to try and use that word pretty frequently here. Instead of add, combine. We might be combining some positive numbers, some negative numbers, but we're going to be combining different numbers or adding integers today. So just as a quick reminder, if you've forgotten what an integer is all of your whole numbers, so your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., plus their opposites. So the opposite, if you remember from last lesson, the opposite of 1 is -1, and the opposite of 2 is -2. So integers are all of our whole numbers along with their opposites, and we call those our integers. No fractions, no decimals, just our whole numbers and their opposites. So let's get started and look at how to combine our integers. At points today, we'll be using a number line to help you visualize movement. We can use a horizontal number line. You can also use a vertical number line, and you might find that in class we do both of those. And you might have a preference that you would like to use one maybe horizontal instead of vertical, or one over the other. Or you might find you don't need a number line at all. But for students who like to visualize these numbers, a number line can be really helpful. So we're going to combine or add the following integers on the number lines. And we have numbers 1 and 4, a positive 1 and a positive 4. So starting at our 0, we've got a positive 1 here, and it helps if we remember that a positive 1 means we're going to go right, and a positive 4 also means we're going to go right. If you're using a vertical number line, positive means that we're going up the number line. So up 1 and up 4 if we were using a vertical number line. But let's take a look at what that looks like. When we start at 0 and we go right 1, and then we go right 4 more, we combine those two numbers, or we've added those two numbers, and you know that 1 plus 4 is 5. Easy, right? All right, let's take a look at another one then. This time we have -1 and -4. We're going to combine -1 and -4. Well, if a positive sign means go to the right, what do you think a negative sign means? Hopefully you said left. This means that we are going to go left 1 and left 4 more. If you were on a vertical number line, if you remember that a positive sign meant we were going up on the vertical number line, what do you think a negative sign means? Hopefully you said the negative sign means down. So in this case, if this were 0 on our vertical number line, we would go down 1 and then down 4 more to find out what number we get when we combine those. But let's take a look at our horizontal number line here, and we'll go left 1 and left 4 more. And when we've done that, we've ended at -5. So -1 and -4, or -1 combined with a -4, or -1 plus -4, a lot of different ways that you can say that, is -5. And hopefully you notice it's just the same as 1 plus 4, but now because we're combining two negatives, we get a negative answer, which leads us to our first helpful tip. When we are adding integers with the same sign, as in all of the integers that we're adding are positive or they're all negative, they all have the same sign, what we're going to do is add the absolute value of the addends, or the absolute value of the numbers, and after we've added the absolute value, we'll then use the sign of the addends for our final answer for the sum. So if we're adding all positive numbers, our final answer will be positive, and if we're adding all negative numbers, our final answer will be negative. So let's practice using those words and those tips here. So we've got -3 and -4. We're combining -3 and -4. And the first thing I notice is that these have the same sign. They are both negative. If I'm using the number line, I know that this means go left 3 and go left 4 more. But let's use our tips and tricks. Our first tip, when we said we're adding with the same sign, is to add the absolute value. So I need to find the absolute value of -3 and the absolute value of -4. If you remember from last lesson, the absolute value of a number is the distance from 0. So the absolute value of -3 is 3, and the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. So the first thing I do is add their absolute value, and I find that that is 7. My second step is to keep the sign. So since both of these are negative and I'm combining them, I'm combining 3 negatives and 4 negatives all together, I'm going to have 7 negatives, or negative 7. So I added the absolute value, and then I kept the sign of the add-in. So negative 3 and negative 4 is negative 7. Right here, I've got 3 different add-ins, negative 4 and negative 6 and negative 2. They all have the same sign, so I'm going to follow my steps again. I'm first going to add the absolute value. This time I'm going to do the absolute value mentally. I'm not going to use the bars. So the absolute value of negative 4 is 4, and the absolute value of negative 6 is 6, and the absolute value of negative 2 is 2. I'm going to add those all together. 4 plus 6 plus 2 is 12. And then, after I've added the absolute value, I keep the sign of the add-ins. Well, all my add-ins are negative, so I'm going to make that a negative 12. A lot of times when students struggle with this, I'll even say the negative after the number. You heard me say this maybe on the previous slide. I said 4 negatives, 6 negatives, and 2 negatives. Think of it if I were adding 4 apples. 4 apples and 6 apples and 2 apples is 12 apples. Well, now I just have negatives. So 4 negatives, 6 negatives, and 2 negatives is 12 negatives, or negative 12. If it helps you to say the negative sign after, that's another helpful trick if you're really struggling with this. But our general tip is if they have the same sign, add the numbers, add the absolute value, add the digits, and then keep the sign. All right, let's take a look at a slightly different one. We're going to go back to our number line because you can see in this case our add-ins do not have the same sign. In this case, we've got a negative 3 and we're combining it with a positive 7. If I'm thinking about the number line, if you remember, negatives mean left, so I'm going to go left 3, and positives mean right, so I'm going to go right 7. If I draw that on the number line, here's what that looks like. Left 3, always starting at 0, and then right 7. And after I've combined those two numbers, I've finished, or I've landed on our 4 right here. So we could say that that is positive 4. Can you think of any number facts that you know where 7 and 3 combined to be 4? Hopefully you said, oh yeah, 7 minus 3 is 4. And if you take a look, I've got a positive 7 here and a positive 7 here. I've got a negative 3 here and a negative 3 here, and they both equal 4. So really, I can add my add-ins in any order. I can rewrite that in any order. I could rewrite that as positive 7 minus 3, like I did here, as long as that positive sign stays with the 7 and that negative sign stays with the 3. We keep the sign with the number. All right, that might have been a little too much for you. Just trying to point out some patterns here. Let's take a look at another one. I've got a positive 4 and a negative 6. Again, my signs are not the same, so I can't just add them and keep the sign. So I'm thinking of this in terms of my number line. That positive 4 means go right 4, and that negative 6 means and go left 6. So start here, positive 4, and left 6. When we draw that on the number line, we look like this, right 4, and then left 6. And when we've done that, we've ended at negative 2. All right, can you think of any number facts that 4 and 6, where 4 and 6 equal a 2? Well, I know that 6 minus 4 equals 2, which is kind of similar to this. It's got the same numbers, it's just I've got a negative 2. My 6, instead of being positive, is negative, and my 4 is negative instead of being positive. But hopefully you're starting to see some relationships here between the facts that you already know. All right, let's take a look then at our shortcuts here. So what do we do when we're adding integers and the signs are not the same? The first thing that we're going to do is find the difference of the absolute values of the add-ins. So we're going back to absolute value again, but this time we're finding the difference, meaning we're going to subtract them. When they had the same sign, we could add them, but now that they've got different signs, we are going to subtract the absolute value. And then we'll keep this sign or use the sign of the addend that had the greatest absolute value. A lot of times we'll say use the sign of the bigger number. That's not technically a great math term because the number is not any bigger in size. It's just farther from 0. So we want to use the sign of the addend that's farthest from 0 or it has the greatest absolute value. But a lot of students just like to say the bigger number. So just make sure you understand what we mean when we say that. All right, let's put it into practice. So I've got two numbers that I'm combining, a -9 and a 3. If I had a number line, I would go left 9 and right 3. I'm combining 9 negatives, but only 3 positives. I've got more negatives than positives, so I do know my answer logically should be negative. But let's use our steps here. Our steps said first to find the difference of the absolute value. Well, I'm going to think about what the absolute value of these two numbers is. The absolute value of -9 is 9, and the absolute value of 3 is 3. And I want to find the difference of those. So the first thing I'm going to do is take 9 minus 3, which is 6. Now, as far as what sign I need the sign of the number with the greater absolute value, or the bigger number. 9 is greater than 3, 9 is bigger than 3. This is the number with the greater absolute value, and if we go back to where we started, that was a -9. Okay? We said logically, I'm combining 9 negatives and only 3 positives, so I'm going to have more negatives. So it makes logical sense that my final answer is in fact still negative. In this case, it's a -6. All right, let's try it again with our absolute value bars. My absolute value of -4 is 4. I'm going to do it without the bars this time. And the absolute value of 12 is 12. All right, now I want to subtract these, but I don't want to do 4 minus 12. I want to do 12 minus 4. I'm going to take the one with the larger absolute value and subtract. So when I do 12 minus 4, I get 8. That's my difference. And then I use the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. 12 has a greater absolute value than 4. 12 is a bigger number. It's farther from 0. And if I go back to where I started, 12 is a positive number. So I'm going to write +8. But you'll notice most of the time we don't write the positive sign. The positive sign is implied. We do have to write a negative sign. That's not implied. But without a sign, if we just saw 8 without a sign, it's implied that it's a +8. All right, we've got another one here. We're combining two numbers. They have opposite signs. We're combining a +8 and a -6. I'm going to use the absolute value of 8 and the absolute value of -6, which is 6, and I'm going to find the difference. The difference between 8 and 6 is 2. And when I look at this, 8 is farther from 0 than -6, so I've got to use the sign of 8. 8 is positive, so my final answer is positive. Again, if we're thinking about this logically, on a number line, we would go right 8 and left 6. We would go right 8 times, but we would only move backwards or move left 6 times. So I've got more positives than I do negatives. So it makes sense that my final answer is going to still be on the positive side of the number line. All right, now we've got some practice using these things in algebra. Now, you guys may not have been introduced yet into how to solve algebraic equations, so this might be a little tricky for you, but we're going to do our best to solve for a variable using our combination of integers. All right, so I want to get the y by itself, and I see with the y there is a 7, and I need to get rid of that 7. Well, the way that I get rid of a +7, I know this is a +7 because there's no sign in front of it. The way that I get rid of a +7, the way that I zero it out is by using its opposite, -7. Whatever I do to one side, I need to do the other because it tells me that this is equal. So I need to treat both sides equally to keep them equal. Once I've done that, +7 and -7, those zero out. So I'm left with just a y. And on the right-hand side, I'm combining a -7 and another -7. I'm combining two numbers with the same sign. Well, I remember when they have the same sign, I add them and keep the sign. -7 and -7 is -14. Or if I'm thinking left and right, if I go on my number line left 7 and left 7 more, I'm at -14. All right, I'll post a second video with some more challenge problems using integers to solve for variables, but That's our objective for today.